You've spent roughly a third of your entire life asleep, and you've been doing it wrong based on advice that's either outdated, invented, or actively harmful. Here are 44 reasons why. 1. 8 hours of sleep is the number your doctor repeats, your fitness tracker guilts you with, and your mother enforced like a courthouse ruling. Miss it, and you're practically committing biological negligence against yourself. Here's the problem. That rule has no single scientific origin. It is a cultural average, and averages by definition describe no one perfectly. The 8-hour standard emerged largely from labor movement campaigns in the 19th century. 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. A social equity slogan, not a medical prescription. Sleep need is highly heritable and genetically determined. Researchers at UC San Francisco identified a gene mutation that allows some people to thrive on 6 hours with zero impairment. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine gives adults a range of 7 to 9 hours, with some healthy individuals falling legitimately outside that window in both directions. Short sleepers, people who naturally function on 6 or fewer hours, exist as a genuine biological category, not a personality brag. And here's the part nobody tells you. Sleeping more than 9 hours regularly correlates with higher mortality risk in large population studies. More isn't automatically better. Your body has a specific requirement that belongs to you and only you, shaped by genetics, age, and physiology, not by an industrial-era labor slogan that got laundered through a century of repetition until it started sounding like science. Prescribing 8 hours to every human on Earth is like prescribing the same shoe size to every human on Earth, technically based on an average. Practically useless for most people actually wearing the shoe. 2. The nightcap is a time-honored, culturally celebrated ritual. A small glass of something strong, and you'll be unconscious before your head hits the pillow. Practically medicinal. Alcohol does not improve sleep. It sedates you, which is an entirely different and significantly worse biological event. And confusing the two is costing you the quality of every night you end with a drink. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep in the first half of the night, the stage responsible for memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and cognitive restoration. As the body metabolizes it in the second half, it creates a rebound effect. Lighter sleep, more arousals, fragmented architecture, and a morning that feels mysteriously worse than the effortless unconsciousness you slipped into. A 2020 study in JMIR Mental Health found that even low alcohol consumption reduced sleep quality by 9.3%, and heavy consumption reduced it by nearly 40%. Alcohol also increases the likelihood of sleep-disordered breathing and worsens existing sleep apnea by relaxing throat muscles. So if you already snore, you're adding fuel to a fire you haven't diagnosed yet. The falling asleep faster effect is real, but deceptive. It's the neurological equivalent of being knocked unconscious rather than genuinely sleeping. Your brain isn't transitioning into rest. It's been chemically subdued, and it will spend the rest of the night crawling back from that. Using alcohol to sleep better is like switching off a computer by yanking the power cord. Yes, it stops. No, that's not the same thing as shutting it down correctly, and the files suffer for it every single time. 3. Your partner snores and you elbow them. They roll over. Everyone moves on. It's a running household joke. Gross, loud, slightly endearing, and fundamentally meaningless. It is not meaningless. Snoring is your airway trying to send a distress signal in the only language it has, and treating it as a minor social inconvenience while ignoring what it might represent is one of the more consequential mistakes you can make about your health. Chronic loud snoring is the primary symptom of obstructive sleep apnea, a condition affecting an estimated 1 billion people globally and dramatically underdiagnosed. Sleep apnea causes repeated cessations of breathing during sleep, sometimes hundreds of times per night. Each one triggering a microarousal and a stress hormone spike your body never asked for. Untreated sleep apnea is independently associated with hypertension, atrial fibrillation, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and increased all-cause mortality. A 2019 study in the European Heart Journal linked it to a 49% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. The harmless snorer trope has contributed to a massive diagnostic gap. An estimated 80% of moderate to severe sleep apnea cases remain undiagnosed, partly because the person doing the snoring feels fine, wakes up, goes about their day, and assumes everything is working as designed. It is not. Dismissing snoring as harmless is like dismissing a car's check engine light as annoying dashboard theater. The noise isn't the problem. The noise is the announcement of the problem. And ignoring announcements doesn't cancel what's being announced. It just delays the reckoning. 4. Discipline. Willpower. You've heard the stories of famously productive people who sleep 5 hours and conquer the world before breakfast. Sleep less, do more, hack the system, optimize the machine, and treat rest as a luxury reserved for the unmotivated. You cannot train your brain to require less sleep. What you can do, and what chronic undersleepers reliably accomplish, is train it to stop complaining about being deprived, which is considerably worse because it removes the warning system while the damage continues accumulating. Research from the University of Pennsylvania showed that subjects restricted to 6 hours of sleep per night for 2 weeks performed as poorly on cognitive tests as subjects who had been awake for 24 hours straight. The critical detail: they reported feeling fine. The subjective sense of adapting to less sleep is a well-documented feature of sleep deprivation itself. Impaired judgment about your own impairment, executed by the very neural systems the deprivation is degrading. Chronic partial sleep deprivation accumulates into what researchers call sleep debt, impairing reaction time, working memory, and emotional regulation in measurable, compounding ways that don't plateau the way your self-assessment does. The rare genetic short sleeper mutation affects an estimated 1 to 3% of the population. The other 97% who claim to function brilliantly on 5 hours are almost certainly habituated to impairment they can no longer feel. Convincing yourself you've adapted to sleep deprivation is like convincing yourself you've adapted to a slow carbon monoxide leak because you stopped noticing the headache. The feeling of coping is not the same thing as actually coping. 5. Napping is what toddlers and retirees do. If you're a functioning adult with responsibilities, lying down in the middle of the day is a character flaw dressed up as self-care, a productivity confession wrapped in a blanket. This attitude is a cultural artifact of the industrial workday, not a biological truth, and it has cost the working world an enormous amount of recoverable performance. Napping is one of the most evidence-backed cognitive performance tools available to humans. NASA research on military pilots found that a 40-minute nap improved performance by 34% and alertness by 100%, numbers most productivity interventions would kill for. A 10 to 20-minute power nap, targeting stage 1 and 2 sleep only, demonstrably improves alertness, mood, and motor learning without producing sleep inertia, the grogginess that comes from entering deeper stages. The bad reputation napping has earned comes almost entirely from incorrect execution. Sleeping too long, waking from slow-wave sleep, and blaming the concept for a timing problem. Napping longer than 30 minutes risks entering that deeper territory, which is the execution error, not an inherent flaw in rest. Many historically productive figures, Winston Churchill, Albert Einstein, were documented and deliberate nappers who treated the practice as non-negotiable. Mediterranean and Latin American siesta cultures, long mocked by productivity culture, show lower rates of coronary heart disease, with some research linking afternoon rest habits to that difference. Calling a 20-minute nap lazy is like calling a pit stop in a race lazy. The car that skips every pit stop to save time doesn't win. It breaks down on the track while the pit-stopping car laps it. 6. You're not technically sleeping, but you're resting. Eyes closed, body horizontal, mind drifting somewhere between a thought and a dream. Close enough, surely. You're at least capturing some of the benefits. You are capturing approximately none of them. Quiet wakefulness and sleep are not on the same biological spectrum. They are categorically different physiological states, and no amount of stillness, however sincere, however prolonged, bridges that gap or substitutes for what sleep produces. Sleep generates distinct neurological events that simply do not occur during relaxed wakefulness at any level of restfulness. The glymphatic system, which flushes metabolic waste from the brain, including amyloid beta, the protein linked to Alzheimer's disease, is primarily active during deep NREM sleep and dramatically less active during wakefulness, regardless of how calm or still that wakefulness is. EEG readings of resting awake brains versus sleeping brains show fundamentally different wave patterns. Confirming the restoration happening in sleep is electrochemically distinct, not just experientially different. Subjective rest studies consistently show that people who rest quietly but don't sleep still perform significantly worse on subsequent cognitive tasks than those who napped for even 10 minutes. The myth persists partly because the fatigue relief from lying down is real, but that relief is musculoskeletal, not neurological. Your muscles appreciate the break. Your brain is still waiting for its turn. Lying still with your eyes closed, hoping for sleep benefits, is like parking your car in front of a charging station and hoping electricity transfers through goodwill. The plug has to go in. Proximity is not connection. 7. They stay up until 2 in the morning on their devices and can't get up for school. Pure laziness, lack of discipline, a generation that needs to try harder and respect a schedule the way previous generations did. Teenage sleep patterns are not a lifestyle choice. They are a documented biological shift driven by puberty-induced changes in circadian rhythm, and no quantity of discipline, parental authority, or early bedtime enforcement overrides what the endocrine system has already decided. During puberty, the timing of melatonin release shifts approximately 2 hours later, making it biologically difficult to feel sleepy before midnight and biologically impossible to feel genuinely alert at 6 in the morning. The American Academy of Pediatrics officially classified early school start times as a public health problem and recommended that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30. Studies of districts that actually shifted start times later showed measurable improvements in attendance, graduation rates, teen car accident rates, and mental health outcomes. Not because teenagers suddenly became more motivated, but because the schedule finally aligned with their biology. This circadian phase delay is present across all cultures studied, including those without artificial light or smartphones, which definitively demonstrates it's biological, not technological. The shift reverses naturally in early adulthood, which is why college students with flexible schedules suddenly appear to become more functional. The biology corrected itself, not the character. Telling a teenager to wake up early through willpower is like telling someone to stop being short through effort. The judgment feels righteous. The biology doesn't care about the judgment. 8. Sleep is offline mode. The lights go out, the system powers down, and nothing important happens until morning boots you back up. You're not there. The body is idling. Rest means stillness, means inactivity. Sleep is one of the most metabolically and neurologically active states your body ever enters, and shutdown is about the least accurate word available in the English language to describe what's actually happening while you're unconscious. During REM sleep, the brain is nearly as active as during wakefulness, consuming similar glucose and oxygen levels, with motor cortex activity so intense that the brainstem actively paralyzes the body to prevent physical acting, out of whatever the brain is processing. Growth hormone is released primarily during deep, slow-wave sleep, making sleep the primary mechanism of physical tissue repair and muscle recovery in adults, which means the gym is warm up and sleep is the actual training session. The immune system dramatically upregulates during sleep, producing and deploying cytokines and T cells, and sleep deprivation measurably suppresses immune function within days of restriction. Memory consolidation, the process of transferring short-term memories to long-term storage, is an active, structured neurological process that occurs specifically during sleep cycles and cannot be replicated by quiet rest. Core body temperature, blood pressure, and hormone levels all undergo coordinated, purposeful fluctuations across sleep stages, none of which resemble passive inactivity. Sleep isn't your body's off switch. It's the maintenance shift, the crew that comes in after hours to fix, file, rebuild, and sanitize everything the day destroyed. Calling it shutdown is an insult to the entire night crew. 9, a classic, grandmother's prescription, passed down with absolute confidence. Warm milk before bed, and you'll drift off like a peaceful farmyard animal. It's been repeated for generations, which must mean it's doing something real and measurable. The chemical rationale behind warm milk as a sleep aid is scientifically negligible, and the effect, if real at all, is almost entirely psychological, which doesn't mean it's worthless, but it does mean you should stop crediting the milk. The most cited mechanism is tryptophan, an amino acid in milk that is a precursor to serotonin and melatonin. But the amount of tryptophan in a glass of milk is insufficient to meaningfully raise brain tryptophan levels or increase melatonin production in any quantity that registers on a sleep outcome. Tryptophan also competes with other amino acids to cross the blood-brain barrier, and the protein in milk makes that competition harder rather than easier, reducing whatever small effect might theoretically exist. A 2015 review in the Journal of Sleep Medicine found no robust clinical evidence that milk consumption before bed improves sleep onset or quality in controlled trials. The warmth itself has a minor and genuine sedative adjacent effect. Warm beverages slightly raise core body temperature, and the subsequent drop mimics the temperature decrease naturally associated with sleep onset. The psychological bedtime ritual signal may also be the actual mechanism. Your nervous system is conditioned to expect sleep after a familiar routine, regardless of the specific content of that routine. Warm milk as a sleep aid works roughly the same way a lucky shirt works in sports. The shirt isn't doing anything. The ritual is. Don't confuse the vessel with the effect. 10. You're awake at 3 in the morning. Obviously, the solution is to stay horizontal, close your eyes harder, count something, and eventually muscle through to unconsciousness. Leaving the bed feels like admitting defeat, like the sleep is right there, and you just need to hold on long enough to catch it. Staying in bed while awake is one of the most counterproductive things a person with insomnia can do, and sleep medicine has understood this for decades, while popular advice stubbornly ignored it. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, the gold standard first-line clinical treatment, explicitly prescribes what's called stimulus control, which means getting out of bed if you haven't fallen asleep within approximately 20 minutes. Every minute you spend awake in bed trains your brain through simple conditioning to associate the bed with wakefulness and anxiety rather than sleep, creating a conditioned arousal that becomes self-perpetuating and increasingly difficult to dismantle the longer it's allowed to develop. Staying in bed and trying harder directly increases sleep anxiety, which activates the sympathetic nervous system, the exact system that physiologically prevents sleep from occurring. CBTI consistently outperforms sleep medication in long-term outcomes, with effects that persist after treatment ends, versus medication effects that disappear after discontinuation. Sleep effort is a clinically documented paradox of arousal. The harder you try to sleep, the less likely sleep becomes, because sleep requires the absence of effortful pursuit to initiate. Trying to force sleep by staying in bed is like staring at a pot to make it boil faster. The staring doesn't help. The staring is specifically making things worse. Get up. Do something dull. Let it happen without you watching. 11. Dreaming equals REM. Everyone knows this. Your most vivid, bizarre narrative dreams happen in REM. Therefore, dreaming is a REM-exclusive event, and the rest of your sleep is a dreamless void. Dreaming occurs across multiple sleep stages, including NREM sleep, and REM dreams are simply the louder, more cinematic tenants in a building with several other residents running their own quieter programming throughout the night. Studies using sleep lab awakenings at different stages found that subjects reported dreamlike experiences during NREM sleep approximately 50 to 70% of the time, lower than REM's near 100% rate, but far from the zero the conventional wisdom implies. NREM dreams tend to be more fragmented, conceptual, and less narrative, more like thoughts or impressions than stories, which is why people often dismiss them as not really dreaming upon waking. Slow-wave deep NREM sleep also produces its own category of mental activity, including sleep talking, sleepwalking, and night terrors, all of which involve some form of mentation without any REM involvement whatsoever. The distinction matters clinically. Nightmares are vivid, narrative, and produce awakening from REM, while night terrors are NREM arousals involving extreme fear with no recalled dream content. Two entirely different phenomena requiring different clinical approaches. The brain's default mode network, associated with daydreaming and mind-wandering during wakefulness, remains active across all sleep stages to varying degrees. Saying only REM produces dreams is like saying only the lead singer makes music. The bassist is doing something the entire time. You're just not paying attention because the lead singer is louder and more charismatic. 12. You've had a brutal day. You crawl into bed, flip on something familiar and low stakes. Let the noise wash over you, and it's relaxing. It's your transition. It's practically a sleep aid. Television in bed activates nearly every system that is biologically incompatible with sleep onset, and it is not a wind down. It is a very convincing counterfeit of one that looks correct from the inside, because relaxation and sleep preparation feel subjectively similar when they are physiologically quite different. Screens emit blue spectrum light at a peak wavelength of approximately 480 nanometers, which directly suppresses melatonin production by signaling to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, your master body clock, that it is daytime and you should remain alert. The unpredictable, emotionally variable nature of television content, especially anything with conflict, comedy, or narrative tension, maintains cortisol and dopamine levels that are directly incompatible with sleep onset, regardless of how relaxed you feel watching it. Autoplay features and episodic cliffhangers are specifically engineered by streaming platforms to override the natural fatigue signals that would otherwise prompt you to stop, and they are extraordinarily good at their job. A 2014 study in PNS found that reading on a light-emitting device before bed delayed melatonin onset by 1.5 hours and reduced next morning alertness compared to reading a physical book. The "it relaxes me" response reflects psychological comfort, the same neural satisfaction available from any familiar ritual, not actual physiological preparation for sleep. Using TV to fall asleep is like playing loud music to help you focus. The logic feels airtight from inside. From outside, you've just added a louder problem to the original one. 13. Old people wake up at 5 in the morning and don't need much sleep. You've seen it your whole life. It's just biology. They've aged past the need for extended rest, and their early rising is proof of a smaller biological requirement. Older adults don't need less sleep. They become less capable of getting the sleep they still need, and that distinction between needing less and getting less is the difference between a biological feature and a health problem that's being systematically misread. The National Sleep Foundation recommends 7 to 9 hours for adults across all ages through older adulthood. The recommendation does not drop with age. What changes is sleep architecture. Older adults spend less time in deep slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, with more fragmented and lighter sleep overall. But the biological need for restorative sleep does not diminish, along with the capacity to achieve it. Older adults also experience an advance in circadian phase, the opposite shift from teenagers, causing earlier sleepiness and earlier awakening, which is widely mistaken for reduced sleep need when it is actually a timing change, not a quantity change. Sleep disorders including insomnia, sleep apnea, and restless leg syndrome increase sharply in prevalence with age, contributing significantly to the appearance of natural reduced sleep in older populations. Chronic sleep deficiency in older adults correlates with accelerated cognitive decline, increased fall risk, and immune suppression. Saying older people need less sleep because they sleep less is like saying a broken furnace doesn't need fuel because it's producing less heat. The output dropped, the need didn't. 14. Cozy, warm, wrapped up. Your instinct says warmth equals comfort equals sleep. Crank the heat, pile the blankets, and surrender to drowsiness. Your instinct is fighting against the precise physiological mechanism that puts you under, and it is winning in ways that cost you sleep quality. You don't even know you're losing. Your core body temperature needs to drop to initiate and maintain sleep. This is not a preference or a comfort feature. It is a biological requirement of the sleep initiation mechanism. Sleep onset is triggered in part by a drop in core body temperature of approximately 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and the body accomplishes this by shunting warm blood to the hands and feet, radiating heat outward. The optimal bedroom temperature for sleep, according to sleep research, is approximately 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, cooler than most people find instinctively comfortable while they're awake and dressed. A warm room blunts the thermal gradient the body needs to complete that transition and disrupts thermoregulation during sleep, increasing wakefulness and reducing the depth of slow-wave sleep. Paradoxically, a warm bath or shower taken 1 to 2 hours before bed actually improves sleep onset, not because warmth helps, but because it draws blood to the skin surface, which then radiates heat rapidly, accelerating the core temperature drop your body is trying to achieve. Sleeping in a warm room, hoping it helps, is like pressing the gas and brake simultaneously and wondering why you're not moving efficiently. The body is trying to cool down. You're heating the environment it's trying to cool down into. 15. You've always known which one you are, morning or night person. Some people just like mornings. Others like nights. It's personality, preference, maybe a matter of discipline for the ones who haven't figured out how to push through it. Chronotype, your biological timing preference, is a genetically and neurologically determined trait, not a personality characteristic, not a lifestyle choice, and not something willpower addresses in any meaningful way, regardless of how early you force yourself out of bed for long enough to feel virtuous about it. Chronotype is governed by the circadian clock and its interaction with genes, including PR3, clock, and Cry1. A 2019 genome-wide association study identified 351 genetic variants linked to chronotype, making it one of the most thoroughly genetically mapped behavioral traits in the sleep research literature. Population studies show a continuous distribution. Roughly 25% morning types, 25% evening types, 50% somewhere in the middle. Not a clean binary preference split that discipline can rearrange. Extreme late chronotype, sometimes called delayed sleep phase disorder, is a recognized clinical condition in which circadian rhythm is shifted hours later than social norms require, causing genuine functional impairment that no amount of morning motivation corrects. Forcing late chronotypes to operate on morning schedules produces measurable cognitive impairment throughout the morning, equivalent to mild chronic sleep deprivation, an impairment that early chronotypes simply don't experience on the same schedule. Judging a night owl for being undisciplined because they can't function at 6 in the morning is like judging someone for being lazy because they don't see well in dim light. The wiring is different. Willpower doesn't rewire. 16. Weekdays are brutal. You sleep 5 or 6 hours Monday through Friday and plan to recover on Saturday and Sunday. Banking and spending sleep like a savings account. Smart, flexible system. The research on sleep debt and recovery is considerably less forgiving than this framework suggests, and the weekend solution you're relying on is creating problems it doesn't solve while incompletely patching the ones it's supposed to fix. A landmark University of Pennsylvania study found that cognitive deficits from 1 week of sleep restriction, 6 hours per night, did not fully recover after 2 nights of unlimited recovery sleep. You felt better. You did not perform better. Social jet lag, the misalignment between weekday and weekend sleep schedules, is independently associated with increased obesity, metabolic dysfunction, and cardiovascular risk, separate from and on top of the effects of total sleep deprivation. Weekend sleep extension also shifts your circadian timing later, making Monday morning physiologically equivalent to mild jet lag, a phenomenon documented in chronobiology research and experienced by virtually every person who sleeps in on weekends and then wonders why Monday feels worse than any other day. Inflammatory markers elevated by weekday sleep restriction partially but incompletely resolve after recovery sleep, suggesting biological damage accumulates even when subjective alertness returns to normal. A 2019 study in Current Biology found that weekend recovery sleep did not reverse the metabolic consequences, weight gain, and insulin sensitivity changes from a week of insufficient sleep. Treating weekend sleep like debt repayment assumes the body is running a simple ledger. It's more like a garden. 2 days of heavy watering after a week of drought saves some of it. But some of what dried out doesn't come back. 17. The sleepwalker is wandering through their dream. Whatever they're doing, stumbling toward the kitchen, heading outside, rearranging furniture, they're following a plot their sleeping brain is experiencing somewhere deep in REM. Sleepwalking has nothing to do with dreaming, and it occurs specifically outside of REM sleep, the stage where dreaming is most active. The entire premise of the myth is anatomically backwards. Sleepwalking occurs during slow-wave N3 NREM sleep, the deepest stage, not REM, and it is classified as a disorder of arousal in which the brain partially activates motor systems while remaining unconscious. During a sleepwalking episode, the brain is in a hybrid state. Deep sleep in the frontal cortex regions governing consciousness and judgment, while subcortical motor and limbic areas are active enough to produce coordinated movement without any accompanying awareness. REM sleep behavior disorder, the condition in which people do physically act out their dreams, is a completely separate condition with different neurology, different demographics, and different clinical implications from sleepwalking. REM sleep behavior disorder is strongly associated with neurodegenerative disease, including Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia, while sleepwalking carries no such association and is far more common in children. The folk rule about never waking a sleepwalker is also largely a myth. Waking them causes temporary disorientation, not danger. The legitimate concern is steering them away from physical hazards while they navigate without awareness. Assuming sleepwalkers are acting out dreams is like assuming someone who talks in their sleep is narrating what they're seeing. The body and the dream are running on completely separate circuits that happen to share the same building. 18. You can't sleep. Melatonin. Take 1. Take 2. Take 5. It's natural. It's sold next to the vitamins, and more melatonin means more sleep. Logical escalation of an available tool. Melatonin is a timing signal, not a sedative, and taking high doses does not make you sleep harder, longer, or better. It tells your body clock what time it thinks it is, and the doses most people are taking are so far beyond physiologically useful that they create confusion rather than solution. Melatonin does not produce sleep directly. It signals the suprachiasmatic nucleus that darkness has arrived and shifts the body towards sleep readiness. but the actual sleep is still produced by separate adenosine and GABA systems that melatonin does not directly activate. Most commercial melatonin supplements in the United States are sold in 5 to 10 milligram doses. Research indicates that effective circadian timing requires approximately 0.3 to 0.5 milligrams, meaning most products contain 10 to 30 times the physiologically useful dose. A 2023 JAMA study found that many melatonin gummy products contained significantly more melatonin than labeled, with some exceeding 347% of the stated dose, creating effects that are unpredictable in timing and intensity. The appropriate clinical use of melatonin is primarily for circadian timing problems, jet lag, shift work, delayed sleep phase syndrome, not for general insomnia caused by poor sleep hygiene. Megadosing melatonin to sleep better is like resetting your alarm clock 47 times, hoping that makes you less tired when it goes off. The signal has been sent. What happens next isn't controlled by sending the signal harder. 19. You close your eyes and disappear. You are gone, offline, absent from the room, and whatever happens around you might as well be occurring on another planet. The sleeping brain is inaccessible to the outside world by definition. That is what sleep is. The sleeping brain actively monitors the environment throughout the night and selectively processes incoming sensory information based on what it considers relevant. A capacity that has obvious evolutionary advantages for any creature that sleeps somewhere. Predators also exist. EEG studies show the sleeping brain responds to its own name being spoken more strongly than to other names, even during deep sleep stages, demonstrating ongoing semantic processing at a level of specificity that requires understanding the content of the sound, not just detecting a noise. The Sentinel hypothesis in sleep research proposes that sleep evolved with partial sensory monitoring intact, allowing dangerous stimuli to trigger arousal, consistent with the well-documented phenomenon of parents waking more readily to their own child's cry than to sounds of identical or greater volume. A 2014 study in Current Biology found that sleeping subjects could learn simple word associations and respond to auditory stimuli in ways that affected subsequent memory during NREM sleep. One important exception: the olfactory system during sleep is notably less effective at triggering arousal than auditory or tactile systems, which has genuine life safety implications for smoke and gas detection. You don't disappear when you sleep. You switch to security camera mode, passively recording, flagging threats, running automated maintenance. The office is empty, but the building is still fully operational. 20, blue light filter on, night mode activated, screens orange tinted, melatonin protected, sleep defended. You've done the work. Blue light suppression is a real intervention with real effects, but the research is increasingly clear that the cognitive and emotional stimulation from what you're watching is a more powerful sleep disruptor than the wavelength of the light coming off the screen, and optimizing the wrapper while ignoring the content is a partial solution that significantly overstates its own effectiveness. A 2021 study from the University of Manchester found that dim cool light was more disruptive to circadian rhythms than dim warm light, but that brightness mattered more than color temperature at typical screen exposure levels, meaning your night mode may be doing less than you think. Research from Brigham and Women's Hospital found that even when controlling for light exposure, the content of screen use before bed, social media, news, gaming, elevated cortisol and delayed sleep onset more than neutral content on identical screens with identical light profiles. Blue light filtering glasses have shown mixed and generally modest effects on sleep outcomes in clinical trials, with some studies finding meaningful improvement and others finding results indistinguishable from placebo. Notifications, social feedback loops, and content architectures designed for compulsive continuation are behavioral sleep disruptors that no optical filter in the world addresses. Focusing only on blue light while ignoring content is like putting a noise-canceling filter on a fire alarm and congratulating yourself on reducing noise pollution. The real problem is still making exactly as much noise. You just can't hear it as clearly. 21. The 4-hour sleep CEO, the visionary who doesn't waste time on rest, because sleep is for people without enough ambition to fill their hours with greatness. You've heard it as a badge, a flex, a personality marker worn by people who want to signal they operate at a level beyond biological limitation. Short sleep is consistently associated with worse decision-making, reduced creativity, impaired emotional regulation, and higher rates of physical illness, which are, uniformly, hallmarks of underperformance rather than its opposite. Matthew Walker's research and the broader peer-reviewed literature consistently document that sleep-deprived individuals significantly overestimate the quality of their own thinking and output, meaning the people most confidently claiming elite function under deprivation are demonstrating one of its signature symptoms. CEOs and executives who chronically undersleep show measurable increases in impulsive decision-making and reduced capacity for complex reasoning, quantified in studies using business simulation tasks specifically designed to mirror real executive judgment scenarios. A Rand Corporation economic analysis estimated that sleep deprivation cost the United States economy approximately $411 billion annually in lost productivity and health-related expenses. The culture of bragging about sleep deprivation has been linked to masculine professional identity in certain industries, a social performance often inversely correlated with actual output quality. Some high-profile leaders who publicly claimed to sleep 4 or 5 hours were later found via hospital records or employee accounts to take regular naps, effectively reconstructing a full sleep period through the back door. Treating sleep deprivation as a productivity strategy is like running a car on empty and calling it efficient. The longer it runs on fumes before breaking down, the more it suffers for it. 22. Midnight snacking goes straight to fat. The body stops metabolizing after a certain hour. Eating late is nutritional recklessness that daytime eating somehow isn't, and the clock is apparently running a second parallel judgment system on top of the caloric one. The timing of eating matters considerably less than what and how much you eat overall, and your body does not have a curfew officer checking whether calories arrived before a socially acceptable hour. Total daily caloric intake and expenditure is the primary determinant of weight change, and studies controlling for total calories show minimal independent effect of meal timing on fat accumulation in the absence of other variables. The association between late eating and weight gain in observational studies is largely confounded by the type of food consumed at night. High-calorie, processed, easily available snacks chosen out of boredom or habit, rather than the hour of consumption being metabolically problematic on its own. Circadian biology does show some genuine timing effects. Insulin sensitivity is slightly lower in the evening, meaning carbohydrate metabolism is marginally less efficient at night, but the effect size is modest compared to the total caloric picture. Eating a large meal immediately before bed can worsen acid reflux and fragment sleep architecture, which creates secondary effects on hunger hormones. Ghrelin rises with poor sleep, producing a cycle where bad nighttime eating disrupts sleep, which increases hunger the following day. But the mechanism is sleep disruption, not clock-based fat storage. Your body doesn't have a curfew officer. It has a budget. Blow the budget, and it doesn't matter when you spent the money. 23. REM is sacred. Interrupting it is cruel, disorienting, and damaging. The body is in its most critical repair cycle, and breaking it constitutes a meaningful neurological event you should feel bad about causing with an alarm clock. While waking from REM sleep does produce grogginess and vivid dream recall, there is no evidence that a single REM interruption causes lasting harm, and the fear surrounding it is largely disproportionate to what the science actually supports. Sleep inertia, the grogginess upon awakening, is actually worst when waking from deep, slow-wave sleep, not REM. REM awakenings tend to produce vivid recall and disorientation, but faster cognitive recovery than waking from N3 slow-wave sleep. The brain cycles through REM and NREM stages approximately every 90 minutes across a full night, meaning a complete sleep period includes 4 to 6 REM episodes. Missing one does not structurally deprive the brain the way chronic REM suppression over many consecutive nights does. REM rebound, the compensatory increase in REM sleep after deprivation, demonstrates the brain's capacity to prioritize and recover this stage, suggesting it has meaningful buffering capacity against isolated interruptions. Alarm clocks waking people from REM every morning are the default experience for most of the industrialized world, suboptimal in ways measurable as mood and cognitive tone, but not catastrophic. The clinical concern is chronic REM suppression over many nights, caused by certain medications including many antidepressants and sedatives, not a single alarm clock. Fearing one REM interruption as neurological catastrophe is like fearing one missed workout as permanent muscle loss. The system is more resilient than the mythology suggests. 24. You're not sleeping because work is bad. Something is wrong. You have a lot on your mind. Once life stabilizes, sleep will return on its own. It's situational, temporary, a symptom of circumstances rather than a condition in itself. Acute insomnia frequently transitions to chronic insomnia through learned behavioral patterns that persist long after the original stressor has completely resolved, unless those patterns are actively identified and interrupted. The 3P model of insomnia identifies predisposing factors, precipitating events, and perpetuating behaviors. And it is the perpetuating behaviors that transform acute sleep difficulty into a chronic disorder that outlasts its original cause. These behaviors include clock watching, excessive time in bed while awake, catastrophizing about the consequences of sleeplessness, and compensatory napping, all of which maintain the arousal and conditioned wakefulness that keep the insomnia running on its own fuel. Approximately 30% of adults who develop acute insomnia in response to a stressor go on to develop chronic insomnia, defined as 3 or more nights per week for 3 or more months, even after the stressor has resolved and life has calmed down. The conditioned arousal developed during the acute phase, the brain learning to associate the bed with wakefulness and anxiety, does not self-resolve when external circumstances improve. CBTI works by systematically dismantling the perpetuating behaviors, not by addressing the original stressor. Waiting for insomnia to resolve after the stressor passes is like waiting for a bruise to stop hurting after you've stopped hitting it. The original cause is gone, but you've been pressing on it in ways that keep it sore, and the bruise doesn't know the hitting stopped. 25. Bears and groundhogs and bats sleep through winter. Really long sleep, like you on a Sunday, but for months. Same biological process, just more ambitious and seasonally timed. True hibernation is a metabolically extreme state with almost nothing biologically in common with normal sleep, and the brain does not actually get normal sleep during hibernation, which creates a deficit that animals then have to repay when they wake up. True hibernators, including ground squirrels, bats, and hedgehogs, drop core body temperature to near ambient levels, sometimes below 0 degrees Celsius, reduce heart rate to just a few beats per minute, and reduce metabolic rate by up to 98%. None of these parameters occur in normal sleep at any stage. Brain activity during deep torpor and hibernation lacks the organized oscillations of NREM or REM sleep and is closer to a state of clinical hypothermia than to any recognized sleep architecture. Hibernating animals periodically emerge from torpor every 1 to 2 weeks during hibernation to get actual normal sleep before returning to torpor, meaning they literally need to stop hibernating in order to sleep. Sleep deprivation appears to accumulate during hibernation. Animals deprived of these intratorpor sleep bouts show elevated sleep pressure when they finally emerge in spring. Bears complicate this picture further. They enter a lighter torpor from which they can be easily roused, making their winter rest closer to extended deep sleep than to metabolic suspension. Calling hibernation long sleep is like calling a coma a really committed nap. The surface behavior rhymes. The biology is an entirely different category of event. 26. Full moon. Disrupted sleep. Everyone you know complains about it. It's documented across cultures, repeated for centuries, and feels too universal and too consistent to be coincidence. The evidence that lunar cycles meaningfully affect human sleep is weak, inconsistent, methodologically compromised, and has failed replication at the scales required to be taken seriously as a biological phenomenon. A widely shared 2013 Current Biology study claiming lunar cycle effects on sleep was later shown to have significant methodological problems, including a small sample of 33 subjects and data collection patterns that allowed for spurious correlations, problems identified through subsequent scrutiny of its methods. A 2021 study of over 500 people across multiple cultures and light environments found some evidence of modest sleep timing shifts around the full moon, but effects were highly variable and absent in populations with heavy artificial light exposure, suggesting any signal is easily drowned by ordinary indoor lighting. The psychological full moon effect is well documented as a cognitive bias. People remember poor sleep near full moons, forget poor sleep on other nights, and report no difference in actual sleep quality when objectively measured. The brightness of a full moon is approximately 1/400,000th of direct sunlight, insufficient to meaningfully suppress melatonin compared to standard indoor lighting. Confirmation bias and the cultural salience of the full moon create a perfect environment for this myth to flourish. Striking image, memorable scapegoat, and the human mind's stubborn preference for patterns over randomness. Blaming the full moon for poor sleep is the astronomical version of blaming the weather for a bad mood. Both feel intuitively right and survive mostly on selective memory. 27. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. The timeless, gentle, visually monotonous ritual that was supposed to bore your brain into sleep through sheer numerical tedium, endorsed by generations and illustrated in every cartoon that ever depicted insomnia. Counting sheep has been formally tested, and it performs worse than alternative mental distraction techniques for sleep onset, which means the most famous sleep advice in popular culture is demonstrably inferior to doing almost anything else with your mind at bedtime. A 2002 study from Oxford University directly tested counting sheep against visualizing a calm, peaceful scene, a beach, a quiet walk, a serene landscape, and found that the sheep counting group took longer to fall asleep than both the imagery group and a control group that received no instruction at all. The researchers concluded that counting sheep is mentally too simple to crowd out intrusive or anxiety-generating thoughts. Boring enough to fail at providing engagement, but not engaging enough to actually displace the rumination that keeps people awake. A technique called the cognitive shuffle, deliberately imagining a random, unrelated sequence of novel images rather than a repetitive one, shows more promise in early research as a method of disrupting the pre-sleep mental loops that feed insomnia. The origin of counting sheep is unclear, appearing in literature as early as the 19th century with no documented medical or scientific basis. It likely persisted because boring monotony has surface plausibility that sounds correct before you actually test it. Counting sheep to fall asleep is like using a screen door to block wind. The gesture makes instinctive sense. The object isn't suited to the task. 28. You hit the pillow exhausted, and presumably go straight to the most restorative depths of sleep immediately. Early sleep must be the deepest sleep because you're the most tired, and depth follows fatigue in a logical and convenient sequence. Sleep architecture follows a predictable, structured pattern across the night, and both deep sleep and REM sleep are distributed in specific ways that make the second half of your sleep period critically important, which means cutting sleep short doesn't just cost you extra time, it costs you a disproportionately valuable type of sleep. The first sleep cycles of the night, roughly the first 3 to 4 hours, are dominated by slow-wave deep NREM sleep. So this part of the myth is partially grounded in something real. The problem is REM sleep, which is heavily weighted toward the latter half of the night. Approximately 90% of total REM sleep occurs in the final 2 sleep cycles, meaning roughly hours 5 through 8 of a full sleep period. Cutting sleep short by even 1 to 2 hours disproportionately eliminates REM, the stage most critical for emotional processing, memory consolidation, and the kind of creative cognitive integration that problem-solving requires. The architecture is governed by 2 separate regulatory systems. Slow-wave sleep is driven by prior wakefulness and sleep pressure, while REM timing is controlled by the circadian clock. They operate independently, which is why you can't simply redistribute one by sleeping differently. People operating on 6 hours believe they've captured the important sleep. They've captured the structural part and discarded the filling. Thinking you got the important sleep in the first few hours is like eating the bread of a sandwich and leaving the filling, then reporting you finished lunch. 29. Some people insist on a correct sleep position, back, left side, right side, and suggest that moving around during sleep represents disruption, disorder, or evidence of restlessness that's interfering with the quality of the night. Changing position throughout the night is a normal, neurologically governed behavior that serves specific physiological functions, and any attempt to suppress it would be counterproductive to the very sleep quality you're trying to protect. The average person changes position 20 to 40 times per night, and these postural shifts are partially driven by pressure relief mechanisms that prevent tissue ischemia, reduced blood flow from sustained compression against a surface, from developing in areas that remain static too long. Sleep position does affect physiology in meaningful ways. Left lateral position reduces acid reflux and may improve cardiac function in some individuals. Right lateral positioning can worsen reflux and prone sleeping. Face down is associated with increased sleep inertia and spinal strain over time. Position changes correlate with sleep stage transitions because the brain orchestrates postural adjustment as part of normal sleep cycling, not as a disruption to it. The movement is the architecture, not a flaw in it. Forcing fixed positions using pillow arrangements or positional devices is sometimes clinically appropriate for specific conditions, including sleep apnea, reflux, or orthopedic problems. But the goal is preventing a problematic position, not eliminating all movement. Expecting to sleep motionless for 8 hours is as biologically reasonable as expecting to sit in one position for 8 hours while awake. The body moves. That's the body doing its job, not failing at yours. 30. The dog in the bed is disrupting your sleep cycles. Everyone says so. The sleep hygiene articles are unanimous, and the pet belongs on the floor, or ideally in another room entirely. Research on pet co-sleeping is more nuanced than the categorical prohibition suggests, and the outcomes depend significantly on individual factors and specific animal behavior, rather than a universal rule that applies to every dog and every owner equally. A 2017 Mayo Clinic study of 40 adults found that sleeping in the same room as a dog, though not necessarily the same bed, was associated with acceptable sleep efficiency of 81%, and many participants reported improved feelings of security and comfort that contributed to their overall sleep quality. The same study found that in-bed pet co-sleeping did reduce sleep efficiency slightly, but subjects still rated their sleep as satisfactory, suggesting subjective experience matters alongside objective metrics when evaluating sleep quality. The psychological sense of security and reduced loneliness from pet presence can lower cortisol and reduce the anxiety-driven sleep disruption that is often a more significant problem than any movement from the animal. Allergies, asthma, and pets that are particularly restless or large are legitimate and evidence-supported reasons for exclusion. The problem is applying a categorical rule to a highly variable situation. The sleep disruption from pet co-sleeping varies more by individual pet behavior and owner sensitivity than by any universal principle. The no pets in bed rule is applied with the confidence of biological law and the evidence of a general preference. Some people sleep worse with pets. Some sleep better. 31. 8 hours in one unbroken stretch. That's how humans are designed to sleep. And anything else, split sleep, naps, fragmented nights, is a modern dysfunction, an ancient inconvenience to be corrected through better habits and stricter schedules. The consolidated monophasic 8-hour block may itself be a post-industrial artifact, not the ancient biological baseline, but a pattern imposed by the structure of the working day onto a species whose natural sleep architecture may have looked quite different before artificial light changed the terms of night. Historian Roger E. Kirch's research, published in At Day's Close, documented extensive pre-industrial references to first sleep and second sleep, a bimodal pattern in which people slept in 2 3 to 4 hour blocks with a waking period of 1 to 2 hours in between. The interval between first and second sleep was historically used for reflection, prayer, intimate activity, reading, and quiet work, described not as insomnia or dysfunction, but as a natural and expected part of the night. Sleep researcher Thomas Ware conducted studies depriving subjects of artificial light and found that within weeks they spontaneously shifted to a bimodal sleep pattern closely resembling these historical accounts, without any instruction to do so. Many non-industrialized societies practice polyphasic or bimodal sleep patterns as their baseline, undermining the assumption that consolidated monophasic sleep is the universal human default across all conditions. The pathologizing of waking in the middle of the night as insomnia may in part reflect misalignment between a bimodal biological tendency and a social demand for consolidation. The schedule shaped the norm. The norm isn't the biology. 32. You know your own body. You know when you're tired. And if you were genuinely impaired, you'd feel it. You feel fine, and therefore you are fine. Sleep deprivation specifically impairs the self-assessment of sleep deprivation, which makes it the only performance-degrading condition where the evaluation system goes offline at roughly the same time as the performance, and keeps reporting normal readings while the output deteriorates. Studies from the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research showed that subjects restricted to 6 hours of sleep per night for 14 days stabilized their subjective sleepiness ratings at mild, essentially reporting that they had adapted, while their objective cognitive performance on standardized tests continued to decline across the full 14-day period without any sign of leveling off. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-monitoring, metacognition, and judgment, is among the first brain regions to show functional degradation under sleep deprivation, creating a situation where the evaluator is compromised before the evaluation begins. Reaction time testing, like the psychomotor vigilance test used in aviation and law enforcement, reliably detects impairment that self-report consistently and dramatically misses, which is why those industries use objective testing rather than asking people how they feel. People with gene variants that make them poor performers under sleep restriction show particularly inaccurate self-assessment. They feel alert while performing measurably and significantly worse. Trusting your self-assessment of sleep deprivation is like trusting a drunk person's judgment about whether they're too impaired to drive. The faculty doing the assessment is the first thing that goes. It will tell you you're fine right up until you aren't. 33. Noise is the enemy of sleep. City dwellers are permanently disadvantaged. The hum of traffic and barking dogs are irreversible sleep destroyers, and silence is the only environment the sleeping brain accepts without protest. The brain habituates to predictable, consistent background noise with remarkable efficiency, and some forms of noise actively improve sleep by masking the disruptive acoustic events that actually cause arousals rather than being the cause themselves. Auditory habituation during sleep is well documented. The brain learns to suppress arousal responses to familiar, predictable sounds through simple conditioning, which is why lifelong city dwellers frequently sleep poorly in silent environments, and rural residents sleep poorly in cities. The brain is calibrated to the acoustic baseline it knows. White noise and pink noise, which weights lower frequencies more heavily, have been shown across multiple studies to improve sleep onset, reduce nighttime awakenings, and improve subjective sleep quality by masking sudden transient sounds. The sharp changes in acoustic input that reliably trigger arousals. A 2021 Frontiers in Neuroscience study found that pink noise synchronized with slow-wave sleep oscillations enhanced deep sleep and improved memory consolidation in older adults, suggesting noise can be actively beneficial to sleep architecture rather than merely neutral. The K-complex, a large distinctive wave in NREM sleep, appears to function as a decision gate. The brain evaluates incoming sound and either triggers arousal or actively suppresses it based on familiarity and assessed threat level. Your brain isn't afraid of sound. It's afraid of surprise. The wall of traffic it ignores. Your name whispered. At 3 in the morning, it cannot let go. 34. Psychoanalytic tradition runs deep. Your dreams are dispatches from the hidden self, symbolic, significant, worth analyzing in careful detail. The flying means something. The teeth falling out definitely means something. Whatever the image, the unconscious is clearly communicating, and you owe it your interpretive attention. The idea that dreams carry encoded symbolic messages awaiting interpretation has no robust scientific support, and the confidence with which dream symbolism gets repeated is inversely proportional to the evidence behind it. The activation synthesis hypothesis, proposed by Hobson and McCarley in 1977, suggested that REM dreams result from the cortex attempting to impose narrative coherence onto random neural firing patterns, producing the compelling appearance of meaning from essentially stochastic activation. More recent memory consolidation theories view dreaming as a process of emotional memory processing and pattern integration, functional in a real and measurable sense, but not symbolic in the psychoanalytic sense that dream interpretation depends on. The common universal dream symbols, teeth, falling, flying, appear across cultures partly because they reflect shared physical experiences and common anxieties, rather than shared unconscious symbolism requiring a decoder. Dream recall is highly selective. Vivid, emotionally salient dreams are remembered disproportionately, creating a distorted sample of whatever the brain was processing across the full night. The scientific consensus does not support the reliability of dream interpretation as a psychological tool. It remains culturally compelling and experientially satisfying, but empirically unvalidated. Treating dream content as symbolic messages is like treating the static between radio stations as coded communication. The brain is making signal from noise. The narrative it constructs doesn't reveal the wood's intentions. 35. Conventional sleep hygiene has drawn a hard line. No exercise within 2 to 3 hours of bedtime. The elevated heart rate and cortisol will keep you wired, and anyone serious about sleep should finish their workout by afternoon. The research on evening exercise and sleep quality is far more permissive than this rule suggests, and for most people, the negative effect is minimal, inconsistent, or entirely absent, meaning this rule is turning a guideline for a subset into a prohibition for everyone. A 2019 systematic review in Sports Medicine analyzing 23 separate studies found that evening exercise ending within 1 hour of sleep did not impair sleep in the majority of subjects, and moderate evening exercise actually improved sleep quality in several of the studies examined. Vigorous exercise does elevate core body temperature, heart rate, and cortisol, but these parameters normalize within 30 to 60 minutes for most adults, placing them comfortably within a reasonable pre-sleep window for people who exercise after work. Individual variation is substantial. Highly anxiety-prone individuals appear more sensitive to late exercise disruption than low-anxiety individuals, suggesting the rule may apply meaningfully to a specific subset rather than to everyone who has ever done a push-up after dinner. The rule originated from early, small sample studies with methodological limitations that have since been identified, but it persists in popular sleep hygiene lists through repetition rather than updated evidence. For sedentary people especially, the net benefit of exercising at any time significantly outweighs the marginal risk of modest circadian disruption from evening timing. The rule was a guideline. For some people, it became a barrier. The body needed the movement more than it needed the rule. 36. Deep sleep is the deepest rest. The brain has finally, fully powered down, and maximum recovery is the product of maximum inactivity. The quieter the brain, the more it's recovering. Deep NREM sleep is when some of the brain's most active, metabolically expensive restorative processes occur, and the brain during slow-wave sleep is not resting. It is intensely busy doing things that cannot happen while you are awake at any level of relaxation or stillness. The glymphatic system, the brain's waste-clearing network, is dramatically more active during deep NREM sleep than during wakefulness, flushing out metabolic byproducts, including amyloid beta and tau proteins that have been linked to Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. The slow oscillations that define NREM sleep, large synchronized waves of neuronal firing followed by silence, appear to be the primary mechanism for transferring memories from the hippocampus to the cortex for long-term storage, a high-priority neurological operation that requires sleep to execute and cannot be performed in any waking state. Synaptic homeostasis theory, developed by Tononi and Sorelli, proposes that deep sleep downscales synaptic strength built up during the day's learning, an active resculpting of neural connections, not a passive resting of them. Sleep spindle wave complexes during NREM sleep are associated with subsequent cognitive performance and are metabolically expensive events requiring coordinated thalamic and cortical activity. Growth hormone secretion peaks during the first deep sleep cycle, requiring active hypothalamic and pituitary function. The brain rests during deep sleep is as accurate as saying the hospital rests during the night shift. The building is quiet. The work is not. 37. The new parent watching their newborn sleep 16 to 18 hours a day starts to wonder, is this normal? Should they be more awake? Is all this sleeping doing anything? Is something wrong with a baby who seems to do nothing but eat and sleep? Newborn sleep is a developmental program, not inactivity, and the quantity and structure of it serve specific, critical biological functions that cannot be accelerated, scheduled around, or replaced by any waking activity, regardless of how stimulating. Newborns spend approximately 50% of their sleep time in active sleep, the equivalent of REM, compared to 20 to 25% in adults, because REM sleep is critical for the massive neural development occurring in the first year of life that no other mechanism produces at comparable efficiency. During this REM-heavy early period, the visual cortex, motor cortex, and language regions are developing circuits that REM sleep appears to facilitate through spontaneous neural activation, making it structural programming, not passive rest. The small twitches observable during newborn sleep, hypnic myoclonic jerks during active sleep, are now understood to be sensory motor learning events in which the brain maps the body by activating and observing its own limb movements, turning involuntary twitching into developmental data. Sleep consolidation, meaning longer stretches and fewer overnight awakenings, develops over months as circadian rhythm and homeostatic sleep drives mature. It's a developmental trajectory, not a fixable scheduling problem. Worrying that a newborn sleeps too much is like worrying a construction site is inactive because you only see foundation work. The structural work happening underneath is more critical than anything happening above ground yet. 38. You woke up groggy, bad sleep. You woke up feeling okay, good sleep. Simple, direct readout from your own body, delivered every morning without requiring any outside measurement or interpretation. Morning alertness is a poor proxy for actual sleep quality and is primarily a measure of where in your sleep cycle the alarm clock interrupted you, not how restorative or architecturally complete the night actually was. Sleep inertia, the grogginess upon awakening, is driven primarily by the sleep stage from which you were roused. Waking from deep, slow-wave sleep produces severe, prolonged grogginess even after an otherwise excellent and complete night. Waking from light NREM sleep or at a natural cycle. Completion produces immediate alertness even after a mediocre or fragmented night. The 90-minute sleep cycle means that alarm timing relative to cycle completion shapes morning feel dramatically. Waking 10 minutes before a natural cycle end versus 10 minutes after produces strikingly different subjective experiences from sleep periods that were otherwise identical in total duration and quality. Studies using polysomnography, full overnight brain monitoring, regularly find significant sleep architecture abnormalities in people who report feeling fine and vice versa, confirming that subjective morning assessment and objective sleep quality are measuring different and largely unrelated things. Morning cortisol, called the cortisol awakening response, spikes within 30 minutes of waking, regardless of sleep quality, producing temporary alertness that can mask significant prior sleep debt throughout the early part of the day. Using morning feel to assess sleep quality is like using how you feel stepping off a roller coaster to assess whether you slept well. The immediate sensory experience is real. Its relationship to what you're measuring is mostly coincidental. 39. A quiet read before sleep is civilized, peaceful, relaxing. The gentle act of following a page surely winds the mind down and ushers in the drowsiness that the day's stimulation was preventing. Whether reading in bed helps or hurts sleep depends almost entirely on what you're reading, what format you're reading it in, and the behavioral habits wrapped around the ritual, making the blanket endorsement of bedtime reading some of the sloppiest sleep advice in circulation. Reading physical books in dim, warm light is genuinely associated with reduced physiological arousal and faster sleep onset compared to screen reading. The format and light environment matter significantly and separately from the act of reading itself. Reading compelling plot-driven content, thrillers, cliffhangers, emotionally engaging narratives, elevates cortisol and maintains alertness in direct opposition to sleep onset, regardless of medium. The cognitive engagement required by absorbing fiction that matters to you is not relaxation even when it feels pleasant, and the two are different physiological states that produce opposite outcomes for sleep readiness. The ritual aspect of bedtime reading creates a conditioned sleep cue for regular readers, which is a genuinely useful sleep hygiene component. But it operates separately from the content and can maintain its effectiveness even if the content is deliberately dull and low stakes. E-readers with front lighting suppress less melatonin than phones or tablets, but still emit some light, with the effect depending on brightness setting and duration of reading before lights out. Some people use reading as a displacement activity, a way to stay in bed but delay committing to sleep, turning a potential sleep tool into a productive reason to stay awake until 2 in the morning, feeling responsible about it. 40. You wake up, check your device, and receive a detailed breakdown, sleep score, REM percentage, deep sleep minutes, exact cycle timing, a comprehensive nightly report from the machine on your wrist that monitored everything while you were unconscious. Consumer sleep trackers measure movement and heart rate. They do not measure sleep. The detailed outputs are estimates constructed on proxies, and the numerical precision of those outputs significantly exceeds the actual measurement accuracy of any device currently available without clinical-grade sensors. The gold standard for sleep staging is polysomnography, a clinical overnight study monitoring electroencephalography for brain waves, electrooculography for eye movements, and electromyography for muscle tone simultaneously. Consumer devices measure none of these parameters directly. Consumer tracker accuracy studies consistently show acceptable performance for distinguishing sleep from wakefulness. roughly 80 to 90%, but poor accuracy for identifying specific sleep stages, particularly REM and slow-wave sleep identification. A 2020 Sleep Medicine Journal review found significant variability across device brands, with most overestimating deep sleep and underestimating nighttime awakenings compared to polysomnography gold standard measurements. The detailed precision of tracker outputs, 47 minutes of REM, 18 minutes of deep sleep, creates false certainty that exceeds what the measurement technology actually knows, misleading users about the reliability of what they're reading. Orthosomnia, a clinical term coined in 2017, describes a condition where people become so preoccupied with achieving good sleep tracker scores that the preoccupation itself causes insomnia. Reading your tracker's detailed staging breakdown and treating it as clinical fact is like reading a horoscope for financial planning. The confidence of delivery is calibrated to your willingness to believe, not to accuracy. 41. If you stop breathing hundreds of times during the night, you would know. You'd wake up, you'd feel it. You'd remember something that dramatic happening to your own body, that many times in a single night. Sleep apnea is specifically designed by its own mechanics to be invisible to the person suffering from it. The arousals that restore breathing are almost always too brief to reach consciousness, and the brain optimizes for minimizing disruption while solving the immediate problem. In obstructive sleep apnea, the arousal that terminates each apnea event, typically lasting 10 to 30 seconds or more of actual breathing cessation, is a microarousal lasting 3 to 15 seconds, sufficient to restore breathing and return to sleep without any conscious experience of the event occurring. The neurological mechanism is partially protective. The brain restores breathing at the minimum arousal level required, preserving sleep continuity as much as possible while still responding to oxygen desaturation, meaning the system is doing you a small favor that is also hiding the larger damage from you. Patients with severe sleep apnea, defined as more than 30 breathing cessations per hour, regularly report feeling like they sleep fine until a bed partner's distress or a diagnostic test reveals what's actually happening across the night. An estimated 80% of moderate to severe sleep apnea in the United States remains undiagnosed, in part because the affected person has no first-person awareness of the events that a bed partner may be watching with increasing alarm. Assuming you'd know if you stop breathing in your sleep is the same logic as assuming you'd know if your blood pressure was dangerously high. The system keeps running. The damage accumulates quietly. The person it's happening to is the last one informed. 42. A child who misses sleep is grumpy and tired the next day. They get cranky, maybe clumsy, sleep the following night, and it resets. Inconvenient, temporary, no lasting consequence from a rough night or a few short ones. Sleep deprivation in children produces a counterintuitive presentation that parents and teachers frequently misread entirely. Hyperactivity, rather than the sluggishness adults display, and carries measurable long-term developmental consequences that extend well beyond next morning fatigue. Sleep-deprived children frequently exhibit increased hyperactivity, impulsivity, and behavioral dysregulation, rather than the quieter, more recognizable fatigue pattern adults show when underslept, which leads to frequent misdiagnosis as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children who are actually chronically sleep insufficient and would improve with sleep treatment rather than behavioral or pharmaceutical intervention. A large-scale study of over 8,000 children in the ABCD study cohort found that children sleeping fewer than 9 hours per night had more impulsive behavior, more attention problems, higher rates of depression and anxiety, and measurably smaller prefrontal cortex volume on MRI, structural brain differences, not just behavioral ones. Growth hormone release is concentrated in deep NREM sleep in children, meaning chronic sleep restriction directly interferes with the physical growth mechanisms that operate specifically during those sleep stages. Memory consolidation for both declarative and procedural learning is sleep-dependent and particularly robust in children. Children who sleep poorly retain less from academic learning regardless of how much time they spend studying or practicing. Treating a child's sleep deprivation as next-day tiredness is like treating a crack in a building's foundation as cosmetic. The immediate visible damage is modest. What it's doing to the structure underneath is a different category of problem. 43. Medical residents, new parents, military personnel, shift workers. The people who regularly push through 24-hour stretches develop a tolerance. Their bodies adapt. They function. They have trained themselves into a capacity that ordinary sleepers simply haven't developed because they've never needed to. After approximately 17 to 19 hours of continuous wakefulness, cognitive impairment reaches levels equivalent to a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05 to 0.08%. Regardless of how accustomed you are to the experience, and regardless of how functional you feel during it. Research published in Occupational and Environmental Medicine found that 17 to 19 hours of wakefulness produced performance decrements equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05%, and 24 hours of wakefulness corresponded to 0.1%. Above the legal driving limit in most jurisdictions, regardless of whether the driver feels impaired. The impairment from extended wakefulness includes slowed reaction time, increased error rate, impaired judgment, emotional dysregulation, and reduced working memory, overlapping closely with acute alcohol intoxication across virtually all measured domains. Unlike many physiological stressors that produce genuine habituation over time, cognitive performance under extended wakefulness does not demonstrably improve with repeated exposure. What improves is the subjective sense of coping, the feeling of having adapted, while the objective performance gap remains. Medical training programs that reduced resident hours from 80 to 100 hours per week showed measurable reductions in medical errors, a real-world demonstration of the impairment costs that no amount of experience was neutralizing. Claiming you've adapted to 24-hour wakefulness is like claiming you've adapted to driving impaired because you know the roads. The familiarity removed the sensation of impairment. These are not the same thing. 44. One great night of sleep. Deep, long, uninterrupted, the kind you've been promising yourself for weeks. The solution to chronic fatigue, accumulated debt, persistent cognitive fog. Hit reset and emerge tomorrow as the fully restored version of yourself with the damage undone and the ledger cleared. Sleep is a biological process governed by consistency over time, not a single restorative event, and the chronic effects of sleep deprivation require sustained adequate sleep across multiple nights to meaningfully reverse, no matter how good any single night is. Cognitive performance deficits from chronic partial sleep deprivation require multiple consecutive nights of adequate sleep to approach full recovery, with some measures not fully normalizing after even 3 full recovery nights in controlled research settings. Inflammatory markers, metabolic parameters, and immune function altered by chronic sleep deprivation show partial but incomplete recovery after a single night of extended sleep. The biology doesn't accept a one-night settlement on a weeks-long debt. The glymphatic waste-clearing function, while active every night, clears backlogged metabolic byproducts more slowly than they accumulate under chronic deprivation, meaning one excellent night reduces the backlog without eliminating it. The feel-better effect after one great night is real, but reflects acute alertness, recovery, rather than reversal of cumulative biological effects. The difference between feeling repaired and actually being repaired is the difference between a sensation and a measurement, and these two things regularly disagree. This myth is the most dangerous one on this list because it is the permission structure behind every other item. The belief that damage from chronic poor sleep can be corrected in a single session is what licenses the behavior that causes the chronic poor sleep in the first place. One great night doesn't undo chronic deprivation any more than one great workout undoes months of inactivity. The feeling is feedback. Don't mistake it for a receipt marked paid. If you want to see more, Click the video on screen now.